on this computer. Okay, so we've gone live. It's 1:02 past the hour, and we're in a recording mode. And so today we have our special guest, Jack Christensen. Andrew, as we just established, Jack was Coolidge was president when Jack was born. So we're going to just kind of go over some of the basic background.
You didn't vote for him.
Yeah, I didn't vote for him. We're going to just go over some of Jack's background, and then there'll be time for both of you to ask specific questions of your own interests in the matter. But we thought we'd give you an overview a little bit about who Jack is. So with that in mind, Gary, I've got screen sharing enabled, and why don't we put some images up on the screen, and Jack and Gary, tell us what we're looking at here, okay?
Sure. Wrong one. Sorry.
That's all right.
That wasn't what I had in mind.
I understand.
Try that again. Go back and do it.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you, Jack. Jack, it was great seeing you in the office yesterday.
Yeah, we didn't do very much, but
So Jack, when and where are you, and when about was this picture of you taken?
Well, this is when we had the passenger connection between Tacoma and Auburn. It's probably late 50s. I don't know.
Probably 53 or 4, wouldn't you think, Jack?
53 or 4. The locomotive is a passenger, is what I call a Q4. It was built in 1910. This one was a 2194, and it was hand fired.
And you were the fireman on this train, right?
And it was very good steamer. Engines all built on the same plan, and there must have been 20 or 30 of that, what we call Q4s. But they all developed individual characteristics. Some were good steamers and some weren't. That's a picture with engineer Max King. Max was quite a character. He became sort of a writer, and he did a lot of articles for the Tacoma News Tribune, and I did a few watercolor covers. They had a rotogravure section with a newsprint cover in color, and I think we did about 15 of those between in the 50s up till 1968 or 9 when I was in the booth.
And so, but we haven't been able to find those archives of those Tacoma News Tribune articles that you did with Max, right? Or we found a few?
Well, I've got several copies of the one you were speaking about, the Tacoma Hospital.
Yeah.
I've got the issue that he did of Tacoma Hospital. I could put it up on the screen, I suppose, later on.
Okay.
Well,
or even just the date would be great too.
Yeah, Jack, what was the date of that article in the Tacoma News Tribune?
The date?
Yeah, about the hospital article.
I did a really poor watercolor for that thing.
Yeah, Jack drew the painting for the article.
1969, and I was in Minneapolis then. We're working as a supervisor on the railroad, and we were doing this by mail. I would do a watercolor and mail it back to them, and they would give Max $25 for his article, and I got $25 for doing the painting for their rotogravure was done on letterpress. It wasn't slicked. It was a newsprint, but and this was not a particularly good painting I did of the hospital, but he had quite an article, and it may help you answer some of the questions that you might bring up on the Tacoma Hospital.
You mentioned
go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned
Max. We'll find out when we go further into it.
What's Max's last name?
King.
K-I-N-G.
Yes.
Like the radio station.
Yeah, he was hired out. I think he had a long apprenticeship. Those people hired out in 1910 or 12. 30 years getting promoted to engineer, and they were out of work during most of the Depression. Everything was seniority. If you were cut off, if they cut the list, they'd cut cut the engineers list, and those guys became senior firemen again. There's just one continuous seniority roster. And,
So Jack, you started at the NP though in 43, wasn't it?
42.
42
Yeah, my dad was a machinist there. I was
in
junior in
Auburn.
high school then, and they were very short of help. It was World War II was just got going well, and we just got into it for about 6 months, and I got a job as a common laborer, but it was pretty big money. It was 48 cents an hour, and I was not much for athletics in high school. I was editor of the annual in my senior year for some strange reason.
At Auburn High School?
Yeah, in Auburn High School. Auburn was Western Freight Terminal for the Northern Pacific. Of course, we had a big yard there, roundhouse and car shop, all built in 1913. The original line through Tacoma was bypassed in 1900 when they built the line from Canasket straight down to Auburn. And the old line that went through Buckley, Enumclaw had a lot of steep grades and wasn't really suitable for heavy service. But so the connection down to Auburn, and they established a large yard there that could build 100-car trains and made it the Western Freight Terminus. So it was a big place. My dad, he was a machinist and kind of a boomer. He was working for the Great Northern in Whitefish, Montana in 1922 when they had a nationwide strike, and very vicious. Everybody was blackballed, and he worked his way down to Auburn, and somehow I guess they needed a good man to do lathe work, a good machinist. So somehow he got hired and got good terms with the foreman. So that's where I came into being. He met my mother there, but he'd been a boomer off originally for the New York Central, but
So
anyway,
Jack, were you born in an NP hospital?
no, I was Auburn. They had a hospital there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, that was a pretty good job in the summer, and in the fall, another kid and I divided the afternoon crew caller's job at Auburn Roundhouse. That was about 4 to 12, and that way we could kind of keep up on our schoolwork. And it was about the same pay. That was my sophomore or junior year to senior year. The senior year, I got to work it out, helping the hostlers bring in the engines, give them water and fuel, clean the fires. And I enlisted in the Air Force for cadet training. When I was 17 and a half, you could do that. So then they wanted to put me out fireman, and I was already enlisted in the Air Force. The only thing that they would guarantee that they wouldn't call us up until we graduated from high school. And of course, we started getting an upper hand over the German Air Force in 1943. And so they didn't call me up till December of 44. By that time, the railroad was so desperate for firemen, they'd hired me as a fireman. And I told them I could go be called up any day. And I got exactly a month's work. I was hired in November 44. The age was supposed to be 19, but they waived that. I was 18. And I never lost that seniority date, even though I served in the military. And
so then, Jack, how long did you work for the railroad?
well, from 27th of June of 42 till the 6th or 7th of July of 1999. 57 years and 8 days. That less time out I was in the Air Force for 11 months. We never did get to fly. I serviced airplanes for the guys ahead of us in Bakersfield most of the summer of 44. and they sent us to Wisconsin for radio school, which was not in our contract, but they did let us out ahead of the guys that had 85 points and been over in Europe and Asia for 3 years. So they kind of sneaked us out of the discharge line and got rid of us. Convenience for the government.
So
And I
Jack,
had
what,
11 months of so-called service. I'm a veteran, but the closest I got to harm's way was the Hollywood Canteen. I did meet Sidney Greenstreet and Marcia Hunt down there. They were the actors on duty when we went to that particular place at the time. Never forget that. He was a villain, you know, an overweight guy, very heavy fellow. Marcia Hunt, I think, is still alive. She's over 100 years old.
Oh,
oh
really?
my.
You know.
Jack,
So,
one of my favorite stories was your first night driving a train in Auburn. Wasn't that on Christmas Eve?
Uh, first night of firing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Remember how did that go?
Well,
With the engineer was too intoxicated to work?
oh, well, that was when we were working in the roundhouse. I was a roundhouse laborer. You know, I started out as a laborer, wiper, what they call wipers. I was on the wash rack, which when they brought the engines in on the inbound tracks, there were a lot of coal burners, a few oil burners. They were all practically all steam. They'd shake the fires down. They either save it or kill it, depending on what the roundhouse foreman had any boiler work. He'd have them so-called kill the engine, shake all the fire out, and have plenty of steam reserve. But if you had boiler work, they wanted the fire out, then it had to be rebuilt. But ordinarily, you save the fire, and after the pit, the cinder pit, they dumped the fires. The next stop, just before the turntable, where they put them to bed, there was a wash rack there, and my first job was on the wash rack. We used a mixture of steam and water and some water with a compound to wash the oil and dirt off the running gear, so the machinists could look at make any repairs they needed. If we had any time left over, we'd give the boiler jack and a spray to kind of clean it up. You can see from that picture that reflection on that nice metal boiler jack. And there was a couple inches of asbestos underneath. You can see that jacket there.
Gary, can you kind of point to that so they can see it?
oh,
Yeah, there's
sure.
you can see the shiny, it's a thin metal
Up there.
jacket. There's about an inch and a half, 2 inches of asbestos under there in bricks. It was tied around there with wire that had insulated the boiler. And every 5 years, all that had to be torn off, and so the boiler could be inspected. And a lot of those engines were labor intensive. There was a lot of work connected with them. And so anyway, when we were working in the roundhouse, they could use us as a fireman in the yard, not out on the road, but they could use this as they were so short of firemen in those days during the war. They would use us laborers as firemen. That we hadn't passed the rules or anything. They wouldn't let us go out on the road, and we didn't get any seniority out of it either. If you made one trip on the road, you established a seniority date. I kept mine for it was 57 years. But
You still have it.
I had to sign it away in 1999. And we'd max the pension out at 70, and I was just working for the fun of it, actually. For years.
That's
Ridiculous. It was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, get back to running the engine. It was the midnight switch engine, and the engineer was not Christmas Eve, but Christmas night. And they were short of firemen, so they used me as a fireman. And there was a couple of us guys around us. I did it about 3 times, I think, while I was a laborer. But I was running the engine, and of course, the hostlers let us move the engines around a little bit, so we knew how to move them and operate them. And this guy, he had apparently had a lot of Christmas cheer and was pretty badly hung over. And it was a midnight job. And finally he said, "Are you a kid?" He says, "You ever run one of these things?" And I said, "No," I says, "I just moved them around. Well, come over here. You can try running this thing. I can't do this anymore." And this was on the class lead. We were kicking cars and boosting them in the different tracks. And he says, "Come over here. I'll show you the signals." And there were switch lanterns out there bobbing around, curving back in a circle. That means back up, and coming head is up and down. Up and down violently was kick them, give them a full blast and hard as you can push.
And they're giving you those signals with a lantern, Jack, aren't they?
Yeah, with a white lantern. And then they wanted to stop, they could swing the lantern horizontally. So I was there, watched him a while. I got behind him between the engine and tenders. I stood behind him and looked out down this class lead. There's a long line of switch lamps. Some were green and some were yellow. It's yellow if it was turned into the track or not. It was the class lead, and they were distributing cars down there. So after I watched a while, he had me come over and take a, and it worked for me too. Did what he supposed to do, and for about an hour, maybe. And he felt pretty good after that. When he went to Beans, went to eat, I went up to the shack where the switchmen were having lunch. And I didn't say anything about him running the engine. They never said anything about any difference in the performance. So I guess it was all right.
Pass that test.
I was actually working as an engineer when I was only 17. But yeah, that was. Then of course he was kind of seasick for a while. He'd get up and throw in a few scoops of coal. They were little hand-fired engines.
Which meant that you would actually shovel coal with a shovel from the tender into the firebox that then generated the heat to cause the steam.
Yeah, you had a door that popped open with a air-operated foot pedal. They had a little silver there. You hit it with your foot and it'd fly open. The firebox, you had to keep the sides and back, build up a little bit. Cold, bright in the center, but chugging around in the yard, it wasn't too bad. He'd throw in a few scoops of coal and get back and hang his head over. He was probably vomiting, from Christmas cheer, but after an hour or so, he felt better and took over. And that was my first experience as being an engineer. I was actually running a locomotive in actual work, but it was Christmas night of '43, and then they put me out firing in '44. I told them it was useless because I was already enlisted and they could call me any day. I did last a month, and finally went down and we had basic training in Keesler Field, Mississippi, Army Air Force. And then the summer I spent in Bakersfield servicing airplanes for the guys that were ahead of us who were actually learning to fly. And we never got to that point. We never even got to pre-flight. You had a choice of enlisting with no promises or discharge the convenience of the government. So I took the discharge because I had a job working on the railroad and wanted to get back to it. A friend of mine, Harry Christensen, he wanted to fly so bad he re-enlisted. Nobody knew the Korean War was coming, and he ended up serving in Korea and Vietnam and getting the Shah of Iran out, ended up as a lieutenant colonel with a lot of medals and awards, became a consultant for Boeing, and we lived in, this other guy lived in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And he became a consultant for Boeing, and he had his own airplane. He flew between Everett and Coeur d'Alene to consult with and on one of his trips, he crashed coming home, that was the end of his career. But he had quite a brilliant career. He stayed in, but I never got to that point. And
Well, you became an engineer, though, officially. What was it, 51?
yeah, well, we took our examination late in 50, and there were about a dozen of us promoted in 1951. The way they did it, we had the class was grouped into several groups, 7 or 8 people, maybe 3 of those groups in a class. And I know our group was 7 or 8 of us, and the man with the lowest seniority, they got him to actually work as an engineer. That would establish a seniority date for him and everybody ahead of him. So we all had the same engineer's date, but we never really got to working as engineers for some time afterwards. But they had you promoted and ready to go but as firemen, we were able to qualify on passenger and fast freight runs. If the engineer lets you run the engine, you can qualify. So you were able to do the work when you were promoted. Otherwise, you'd be kind of stuck working as a switch engineer in the yard.
So in 1999, when you finally did retire, you were number 1 on the seniority list.
Yeah, I was number 1 for about 2 years.
Yeah.
The guy ahead of me that kept me from being number 1, he's a great northern guy, a real nice fellow. They all said he'd never let me get to be number 1, but turned out he passed away before I retired.
Oh dear.
He finally did retire in 97. That was number 1. Not that meant a whole lot. I mean,
Oh, it means a
had
lot.
a choice of runs. Of course,
Exactly.
we lost the Amtrak work. We worked Amtrak's trains from the time they took over in 71 until they decided they wanted their own crews in 87 for 16 years. And we never did get absolute seniority. We had a year to make up our mind. We could try Amtrak out and come back to our old seniority. And I'd been working after quite a bit in the late 80s. I was working the Empire Builder when this came about, and I decided to stay with the freight end of it. It was a little more interesting.
Gary, why don't we look at a couple of Jack's paintings? Jack, when did you start painting?
Oh, when I was 12 years old, 10 or 12.
So what is this painting about with the 501?
Well, this is the switchbacks before they built the tunnel.
Over
Stampede
Stampede Pass.
They put an engine on each end. They were called M-class. They had 5 pair of driving wheels, and they used 2 of them. They had a 5% grade, so we had to have an awful lot of power to move a little train.
There are no pictures of engines actually running on the switchbacks. All we have is pictures of the bridges. But Jack is able to recreate it because he knows the area. In fact, we went hiking up there before we went hiking up there when the switchbacks were still very visible. So this painting kind of came out of that knowledge that you gained, right, Jack?
Yeah, they had these 2 engines, the 500 and the 501. They had 5 pair of driving wheels, and they were specially designed for I think they actually used them as yard service after the tunnel was opened up, and they didn't need them anymore.
Supposedly when they were built, they were the largest steam engine in the world, but that didn't last more than a month or so, I think.
Oh yeah.
So
That's nice to bring up these cards anyway.
So Jack, I want to just pause for a second. I want to circle back to our guests, and I'm going to start with Alia. Alia, have you come up with any thoughts or questions or anything that you'd like us to be able to talk to Jack about quick?
After a career that spans so long, like, what is it like looking back in retrospect? Like, is there something that you miss the most? Is there like something sensory that always pops out to you, a sight or a smell when you remember anything like that, looking back?
Looking back, what would it be? How was that again?
Have you,
Just what stands out to you when you think back over your long career? What are the things that pop out to you the most?
Oh, well, images or experiences?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I've got a book out, called Tales of the Northern Pacific. And I had, a lot of experience, like trips to the firemen. The first trip I was on this, the engine in that picture that we use in the connection is 2194, was a hand-fired engine. My first job when I was a fireman, my first trip was Auburn to Leicester, and helping number 2, they put this old hand-fired engine on in front of a big Stoker-fired engine because they needed 2 engines, and you put in about 4 tons in an hour and 15 minutes going to Leicester.
So you shoveled 4 tons of coal?
Yeah, it was all hand-fired, yeah.
Yeah.
You had 1 foot on the engine and 1 on the tender. They're both wobbling around on the curves. It's nighttime. You open the fire door, it's 3,000 degrees hitting your eye, your retinas, and you're looking. When you close it off, all you can see is green balls in front of your eyes. You'll get fire blind. But actually, the first trip I was able to keep the engine hot. They said keep steam up, and I thought I was pretty good at it. The third trip, we had a Stoker-fired engine that was rumored to be a poor steamer, and the Stoker plugged up and having a hell of a time keeping steam up. Fortunately, we had a light train in the road engine. The guy we were helping, he worked a little harder. We got to Leicester, but they decided to use that engine up to the top of the mountain with a mountain crew. They had different helper crews from between Leicester and Easton. And my fire was all messed up because of the poor steaming and full of clinkers, and big delay, and 20-minute delay cleaning the fire before they could leave. And
that was a passenger train, wasn't it, Jack? So
Yeah.
that was important.
The number 2 was our prime train, the North Coast Limited. The engineer said, he said, it was a wet coal, a poor steaming engine. The green fireman did the best he could. We'd gotten a message at Canassa that the engine was going, to have the fire ready. The engine was going all the way to the top of the hill with a different crew from Leicester. He said, the fireman did the best he could with the coal and everything. And besides, messages don't clean fires. Nothing was ever done about it. It was during the war, you couldn't get fired really, except by committing a felony, maybe. They put up with an awful lot of stuff. I don't know, as far as experiences, I think plowing snow in Minnesota when I was an officer, field officer, I think there was some real moments there that you have a hard time forgetting, and a lot of it's in the book that we've got out. That I don't make any money on it, but you can buy it from TNRA.
You have to hook me up.
Oh yeah,
Jonathan.
we've got some in the office. Oh sure, and they're fun.
But,
they're great stories.
A lot of the stories, it's plowing snow in Minnesota, and some of the adventures in Livingston, working as a field officer. But I know there's so many incidents that stand out. It's hard to remember all of them.
So I'm gonna Jack, I want to circle back and engage Andrew at this point. Andrew, I know your interest in this. Just give us a little bit of background on the perspective that you're why just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're looking for and what you're interested in and what you've done so far.
Sure. Yeah. So, thanks for letting me take part in this conversation. I'm the digital media manager for Historylink in Washington, and another digital encyclopedia called Black Past, and I'm a historian, and I'm working currently on a Northern Pacific Beneficial Association history for Historylink article that just wrapping up right now, and I was really interested in your experiences and the first time that you visited and the experiences of others at the hospital. I wasn't sure exactly what I'd find, but so far it's really kind of shaped around the hospital being kind of an artifact of one of the oldest and longest lasting prepaid cooperative medical insurance programs in America. I mean, just in general. And I think it really is an important story in that respect. And so what I was actually hoping to do is maybe um, screen share some of the images of the hospital itself.
Sure.
That I've been collecting, and then if you could just, Jack, if stop me at any time if there's anything, but yeah, just hoping to maybe just get your memories on the place in general. I can do a share
And we're talking about the one in Tacoma, aren't we, Andrew?
Yeah, talking about the one in Tacoma, but it sounds like also you've had, Jack, some experience in Minnesota. So there was also MTBA hospital in Tacoma, Missoula, and Brainerd were the first three, followed by a couple others, St. Paul, I know, and I think two more that were also in Montana and then Minnesota. So if any of those come up at all, then
Well,
And Andrew, before we get going too far, Gary, when we were doing the pregame show, Gary Tarbox mentioned that we have some images. Gary, could you tell Andrew about the images we have?
Yeah, we have some images of the Tacoma facility, exterior and interior, not dissimilar from what you're showing here.
yeah.
Did these come from the library?
These in particular came from Washington State Historical Society. I've been working through they have a full medical records from like 1907 to 1930, and I've been working through. I took like the chunk of the first 12 years, and I'm looking at mortality rates that's from the destruction in 1970 or 1973, excuse me. It closed down in 1969, was derelict for a little bit, and then was demolished in 1973 after they wanted to put like a addiction recovery center over there, but the neighborhood rejected it in McKinley Park in Tacoma, so it was demolished.
Can you just back up a couple images, Andrew?
Yeah.
Quick, I just wanted to. So back up one more. I think. Keep going there. So Jack, do you remember this place?
yeah, I've got it's a very lousy painting I did of it, but it's on. I could hold this up. It's a rotogravure painting.
Please do. Yeah.
But, I don't know if you could.
It's not going to come in very well. If you want to see it, you got to switch over to speaker view on your thing rather than the gallery.
Let's just know that it's there, and we can come up with a copy for those that are interested, because I don't want to goof up our technology. So
I could easily, if you'd like to have this copy of the Tacoma News Tribune, it's from 1969. But this article is kind of just chatty. This engineer, he's a retired engineer. He's making comments on it,
Give him the actual copy date on the article, Jack, because he can get it from the library. Most likely.
It's October 19th of 69. It's a Sunday rotogravure magazine section.
yeah, Andrew, you've got some nice pictures of this.
Yeah,
I was looking to just find like a good exterior shot. So
yeah, my watercolor painting leaves a lot to be desired.
So
Well,
is this
yeah.
sort of the angle that you did it from, Jack?
Hmm?
Was this picture similar to your painting?
Well, for one thing, my trees are kind of knobby. It really doesn't look very good, but I've got trees in there. I got a horse and buggy. So
Oh,
that
but
for
from a postcard.
Postcard,
it's not a
yeah,
very good
wow.
job, but they printed it anyway.
Yeah, but
Covers
can
were
you
pretty
can you tell
faded.
me about your first visit to the hospital?
Hmm. Well, I don't. The only time I remember I broke an ankle at Stevens Pass skiing in the 40s sometime, and in fact I walked around on the darn thing. My dad finally took me down there to. I lost about 6 weeks' work, and I quit skiing after that. But I remember going to the Tacoma Hospital for that. But most of the time, the NPBA, the Northern Pacific Beneficial Association, what they would do is they would, any place they had a large number of employees, like Auburn, Yakima, Pasco, Spokane, but even other towns, anywhere along the line, they would contract with the doctor. They called them local surgeons, but they were just practitioners. They would contract with a doctor in that town. I know Dr. Brandt was in Auburn. He was kind of a close neighbor of ours. And they would, and you just go there if you hadn't needed anything. I remember, and I think we had sort of a yearly physical. I remember going in physical for Doc Brandt, and he got the form out, and he's writing away and asking me how my dad was. He was a machinist. And how my family, where was I working, and all the time he's writing in this form, and I got the idea that most of it was kind of steam heated, but they looked you over, and if it was still movable, able to get around while they were okay. But we did have medical coverage. If you got sick or you got injured, we were covered. And think back in the 19th century, this was a rarity. So it was a unique situation, the NPBA. I don't know if any other corporation that had anything to match it.
So were you treated on site in Tacoma, or are you saying that you were treated by physicians in Auburn that would?
Well, when I broke my leg, or my ankle, it was in my ankle, it just cracked it. In fact, I'd walked around on it. My dad took me over to the Tacoma Hospital.
Okay.
And of course,
There's a picture of him right there.
Yeah, I had
No, I'm teasing.
plaster
Yeah.
cast on. I lost 6 weeks of work, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of gave up skiing after that, until I moved to Livingston. I got back into it. But that was the only time I remember going into the hospital myself.
Now your kids were born there though, weren't they?
No,
No, they were. Oh, okay.
most of them in Seattle.
Ah.
And of course, Mary, our youngest, was born in Livingston.
Yeah, that's right.
And of course, that was the end. Then it was, of course, we had medical then.
And so it sounds like, is it from a couple of things that you were saying? Did the MTPA hospital was it regarded as less quality service than other medical services in the area?
Well, I don't know. When you're 18 or 19 years old, you don't need much service unless you're careless like I was. All I was, I think we were skiing at Stevens, and they hit what do they call it? They hit a hole in the snow and caught its tip, and just a stupid accident. But that was the only time I could recall having to go to the Tacoma Hospital. It was available if you needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I guess they would go over there for physicals.
Because you were required as an engineer to have a physical every year, weren't you, Jack? We're pretty close.
Yeah, I think so. We had to, as I recall, and finally in the 90s, we had to get licenses that can go back to Kansas City every year, get the rules examination, the physical examination, a simulator. I don't know what else in order to get a
So,
federal
so
license.
Andrew,
That was
just
the-
back to you for a second.
Mhm.
You know, the railroad, of course, is geographically dispersed over a large area of real estate.
Right.
And so in like Sumas or Cedar Woolley or something, you know, there might be a handful of employees at most. And so the railroad would contract with a local doctor if they ever needed to go see one, you know, prior to having industrial insurance laws, for example, because the railroad's system of industrial insurance is completely different than anything that you've encountered before. And so it's really only in these communities where the railroad really had a lot of employees that a building like this could be justified.
Yeah, one thing I meant, you figured something what you said. I'm not sure. It seems to me that either the timetable or special, you have an employee's timetable.
Right?
They have a fairly large collection of work called the special instructions for each division. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they listed the company surgeons and what towns they were in.
Yes, yes, they
Right.
did.
Yes, they do, with
If
their
you
phone
were-
numbers.
If you
So
got
if
sick in
something
a certain
happened,
place, you could travel to the nearest town where they had a company, what they call company surgeon. They were actually GPs, you know, general practitioners.
Yeah, the one circumstance where it seemed like they would need the patients to come over to the hospitals, which were like 500 miles apart, was in the cases of like prolonged illnesses. Is that it was too expensive to have those remote physicians care for them, so you would have them go over to either Tacoma. I think it was everything that was west of Pasco. You were directed over to Tacoma, and then everything east of Pasco would be directed over to Missoula.
I would
really?
imagine that's pretty accurate. I couldn't speak to that from personal experience, but that's logical.
All of these items are, of course, much earlier than your experience in the 1940s and 50s. But one thing I was hoping to see if there was anything about your memories around the hospital closing down in the 1969 after giant medical services like Medicare were installed. What was there any like reaction amongst workers, or was there anything that was distributed saying, here's why we're closing down the hospital?
Well, actually, I really can't speak to that. I was road foreman of engines in Minneapolis from 1970. Let's see, from 1967, summer of 67 till January of 70. I was in Minneapolis, then I was transferred to Livingston. So I was kind of out of the picture as far as Tacoma was concerned.
But there were other hospitals in other parts of the country. Did
Yeah.
they say anything about it, like back in St. Paul?
The one in St. Paul also shut down in 1970.
And when did the Brainerd one shut down? Was that earlier?
Or much earlier, yeah. But the one in St. Paul, which is where the hub of all the NP stuff, switched to the Samaritan Hospital in 1970. So
Well, in 1970, of course, they merged with the Great Northern and the Burlington. The NP actually disappeared in May of 1970. Right?
March of
So that I wonder, that's too big a coincidence to be a coincidence. Probably the BN merger then was one of the events that brought the hospital system to an end. Then, what did you think, Gary?
definitely, because they worked on that for at least 3 years. So the fact that it went away in 69 is not surprising.
These are great photos, Andrew. I
Yeah,
just
you
really enjoyed
Yeah, those are really great.
They're very sharp.
Yeah.
Now, is that the superintendent?
No, that is that's the person who tried to turn it into a drug rehabilitation
Oh,
hospital.
Ah,
I see.
Tacoma guy. I believe that this was the last chief surgeon of the
Ah.
hospital before it closed up. So,
Oh.
well, yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. That was all the hospital related questions that I had for you.
Okay. Yeah, we just want to make sure that our guests, had some opportunities to, I mean, this is for you. I mean, Jack and Gary and I have, chatted about this stuff more than once. And so it's,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
I can come up with some more if I just didn't want to step on the time.
oh, no, we've got, I think for time, we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I'd say, maybe go an hour and 15 minutes or so. So maybe another, 15, 20 minutes, because, we got a few more things about Jack that I think you'd be interested in. Gary, why don't we go back and look at a little bit more of Jack's artwork, and back to Alia's question earlier, some of these paintings are, sometimes poignant moments for Jack or important recollections, and especially ones that, Jack is drawing stuff that are relevant to his work experience.
Well,
Yeah, what prompted you to want to start painting trains, Jack?
Well, I don't know, my first painting was of a neighbor's dachshund. And she was a painter herself, and she lived across the street a few doors down. Her husband was a conductor on the railroad, and I later worked with him quite a lot. And I painted her dachshund. But
Well, I mean, that's a great place to start. I own a dachshund, but but then why trains? Just because you like trains?
Well, of course, I guess I got fascinated by the railroad. Yeah, I had so many jobs with them, I was a laborer and a crew caller, and then a hostler helper and fire cleaner. And that way you did everything a fireman did. You took coal, you took water, you shook the fires down, shaking the grates, cleaning those fires. That was hard work. And so you did everything a fireman did on the road. So it's kind of natural when you got out on the road, you knew how to do most of the jobs that a fireman had to do. And of course, steam engines were very labor intensive. And the diesels came, they had a lot of protective devices that would trip and shut the engines down. You had to reset those. But I just wanted to capture some of these engines. Now, this one picture here, these engines were gone when I came. They were early Malley, early
the originals. Yeah, one of the things is each one of these pictures is located in an actual location on usually the Tacoma Division, but somewhere on the Northern Pacific. So these are all from experience. Like this is the east side of the Stampede Tunnel. He's just coming out of a tunnel, the double-headed train, and he's on a downhill grade at this point. Jack has run steams and diesel on the same pathway.
Yeah, when we made these in the note cards, we put a little blurb on the back that explained the picture, what was happening.
This is Lester.
They're putting a helper engine on the caboose at Lester.
Now, of course, Lester doesn't exist anymore because that's part of the Pierce County watershed.
Yeah, well, the station's gone. The track is still there, of course.
Track is still there, but you could only go in there on foot.
This is Easton.
We're looking westward there. See the rear brakeman's picking up orders from the operator. He's got a Y-shaped thing with a string in it. That's how he gets his paperwork, train orders. I've got one of those Y-shaped rods hanging over my fireplace downstairs. This is Livingston. I spent 2.5 years there at Livingston. And of course, the steam was gone, but those were the big Z8s of the last superpower. They had steam. This is top of the hill coming to in the Muir, which is the east end of the Bozeman Tunnel. This is the westbound.
And Jack, I see you've got birds in the pictures as usual.
Oh yeah, we usually put. This is a painting coming the line out of St. Paul towards Duluth, and a morning passenger train came out of there.
Do you still
Well,
paint, Jack?
Gary Tarbox has this painting,
Yes.
and this is kind of a picture taken from the Horton Street Roundhouse, and that warehouse in the back, I think, is still there.
Yeah, it's a recycle station now, but yeah, this was taken in, this is a, I was 14 years old when I took pictures of this engine coming down the track, just like it's shown here. Except my last shot was back about the third car back was where it was. And I shot it, and that was my last shot. So Jack completed the picture for me of actual what I would like to have taken.
So Elia, you've asked a great question, and there's a great answer waiting for that. So I want to make sure that we don't skip that one. So Jack, where are your current paintings? Where are those getting? I know you enter a painting contest every year, don't you?
Well, Foss Maritime, they had an artist painting their pictures for calendars in watercolors, Steve Mayo. In 1985, they decided to open it up to make a contest out of it. They gave you $300 for reproduction rights if you used your painting. You were allowed 2 entries. There was no entry fee. But I started in, I think, 86.
And you're still submitting paintings to, didn't you get some paintings in the Foss calendar this year, Jack?
Yeah, well, they sent us a letter this spring that they were switching over to a photo contest for the employees, which kind of makes sense.
Ah.
You do it on the railroad, they put out a nice calendar. Employees take pictures of actual operations. Of course, Foss wanted paintings of actual operations too, so I tried to do the research. I did a lot of paintings on Columbia and Snake River, and I always, well, on my railroad paintings and on the Foss paintings, we always try to show a mountain or a building or something to locate it. I know one railroad photographer used to love to put block signals in, because all the block signals, most of them had numbers on them that were connected with the mileposts. So it located the painting. But you might have a mountain or a building or some feature that had something that located the painting. That was important.
So,
one of my favorite artists, Ted Rose, who kind of died young, he thought titles were important. He gave the title a lot of thought on a painting, and I tried to do that too. But,
so Jack, this is a painting at Snoqualmie, isn't it?
yeah, well,
Now, what do you do for
kind of
them?
a deal with Richard Anderson. I do his Christmas card painting every year. And
That was the answer,
a
Elia.
little gift of it. And they published that. In fact, I've got about a dozen copies of this year's painting sitting on the bureau there. I don't know how I've got them, but from last year.
This is the 2022 Northwest Railroad Museum Christmas card, and that's a Jack Christensen painting there. And Great Northern 1246, Jack. What a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I had
The museum just acquired that locomotive.
Yeah, they wanted that in there. But we, Richard and I, we just do that painting every year. That's something I do. There's Changing Crews at Butte,
Montana.
in my territory. When I was a road foreman of engines, I was based at Livingston, and I had my territory was the Butte and Helena west on the west end and east of Billings. So we had quite a lot of crews to keep track of. But here the crews are changing engine crews at Butte in the snow. There's hooping them up at Lester. And I had a little blurb at the back. See the helper waiting down on the other track and he's gonna when they'll pull up. He'll get the rear brakeman or the what they call the swing brakeman. They had 3 brakemen, one for the front end and one the flagman, and then the swing brakeman. He would get off and ride the helper up, and the engineer knew about where to stop the train in relation to the crossover, which is out of the picture, but they would ride the helper up and then make a cut of the train where the conductor indicated from his list and cut that helper in a little behind the first half of the tonnage. So somewhere in the middle of the train, and this brakeman would ride the helper all the way to east, and then he'd cut that helper out again and then pick him up on the caboose. You can see the operators holding up the Y-shaped stick with the train orders and a string on a clip. So he'll pick up the orders, and the operator's got another Y-shaped thing for the caboose, so that goes by.
This is all because at that time they did not have radios. So that's the only way you communicated with the train. And so he would give
Yeah, go
orders.
ahead, Gary.
He'd give orders to the head end and then also the caboose end, because he had crews at both ends of it, and they needed to know what they had to do with it. It was mainly which siding they had to take to cross with oncoming traffic.
Now, and of course, Gary, for many, many years, up until, into like 1950s, a lot of that information was transmitted by Morse code.
Yeah.
To the operator.
To the operator. So the operator would get it in Morse code and then transcribe it and then read it back, make sure everybody agreed, and then hand it to the crew. That's how they would communicate. So we got a few more pictures, Gary, before we let these folks go.
Oh, sure. Well,
We
I think we probably
get most of them.
I think we saw. Oh, this is again back at Bozeman.
That mountain in the back that locates the picture. It's an Ordovician's limestone. It's got a kind of a shark fin shape to it.
Yep.
The train is it's coming down off the hill from Bozeman. It's coming into Bozeman from the top of the hill nearer, and this is a westbound passenger train. I've got a A4 there, one of the late model steam engines, but and there's the famous Timken 2626. This is
at Lake Easton.
This is Lake Easton,
Yeah.
And
this is
South Tacoma, but that's where you used to get your orders to go to Portland. You come down from Seattle. They always have what they call a 19 order board, a yellow order board. You pick up orders.
That's McCarver Street, right?
Now this would be train the late 680. This is early in the morning. This is Duluth.
Yeah, I was going to say, that looks like Duluth. I was just there for the first time.
Yeah, the French Renaissance Depot in the background. Our offices were up there. Well, superintendent's office was in that furthest tower. That shows a morning train, and that's the Q4, the hand-fired Pacific, like the first trip I made in the helper. Those engines were built in 1910. They were beautiful machines, and they run just like a sewing machine at 75 miles an hour. As a W3, that was our workhorse steam engine. We had 150 of them, 130 of them. It's the 1745 on Getchell Hill. See, they had a sign that says dump cinders. That was the only place you could dump them because they didn't want to foul the ballast. Shake the fire down and run water from the injector and make a slurry, and we cut to the place for the cinder dump, and he would open the doors. at the bottom of the ash pan and drop the cinders on the track. And the section men would come and shovel them all and clear them away from time to time. But you only dump the cinders in a certain place because they tended to foul the ballast. They're on the downhill looking out to make sure that cinders are dumping. And of course, there's a cloud of steam and hot water coming out with the ashes.
That's great.
And Getchell Hill, that's is that like Maltby area, Jack?
No,
That was coming down Maltby Hill, Getchell, maybe.
no, Getchell,
This is North Dakota. I forget the name of the town. I can't even read it.
Glen Ellen.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
See the brakeman's taking water and the engineers oiling around. They're on the siding. The guy who
my father lived there in that era, in that town. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Glen Ellen. Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
Who was it? Gary, the president of the NPRHA. Bob Horn.
Bob Horn.
Marilyn Horn owned that picture of Glen Ellen. This is Falls City. North Bend local. These little engines were built in 1902. And they only had about 40 of them. They were almost all on the west end of the railroad. We used those on the North Bend local. They were taking water at Falls City on their way to North Bend. Engineers oiling around. You could see the first of the empty log flats. They're taking the log flats up to Tanner and going back towards Seattle. They'll have probably 20 loads of logs maybe. And there was a hill between Falls City and Issaquah. You had to climb that hill. We had to triple that hill with logs because I think those little engines only haul about 800 tons on that uphill grade from the raging river at Falls City up to Preston. And from Preston, they're parallel to what's now Highway 90. That line has already been pulled up, of course.
Before I just
Yeah, Andrew, go ahead. Yeah, we're kind of
If I
wrapping. We're
could-
coming to the end here, so now's a good time for those last questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, it's less immediately hospital related. Could I do a share screen really quick? I just
Yeah,
thought
sure,
that,
please. Yeah, we'd love to see what you've got.
who knows if this will be helpful to look at or not? But I was
And I'll be in the office next week, and we can look and see what we've got for images as well. So
sure. Yeah, it's who knows if this will be easier not to look at. But just thinking about those mortality rates and looking at the hospital records that I've been looking at, I was wanting to
wow.
get your insight on one thing as far as these are all the rates of death basically and the different nationalities and positions of the workers. And so as it goes down, it's the greatest number of those people. So the most dangerous position that we could see over here is laborer. And you mentioned that earlier in the interview, Jack. But it does seem kind of general. So I was just wondering if you could share some insight as far as what does laborer mean, and also, as you can see with this one, it was generally given to a position that would be filled by immigrants rather than American-born people. So
And Norwegian too.
when I went to work was the middle of World War II, which is not exactly, it was kind of a different situation,
Yeah.
And we call them wipers actually, or laborers, and we just had a certain level.
Yeah,
And
you can see Wiper on the list there, Andrew.
yeah, that's why I was wondering, because there might be redundancies. So that's why
I wonder if laborer may be maintenance of way.
So that's what I'm thinking. That's track people.
Yeah. Well, and then also they're sometimes referred to as like the gangs, as far as like your
Yeah.
Track gigs. Yeah.
Track
Or
gangs, steel gangs.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it
Bridges.
sounds like what the labor actually did kind of changed depending on what decade.
Well, now they do have section gang labor up there. So
And
that-
this is just how people were referred to on the hospital records.
Ah,
I see what you're doing.
So yeah, so I just wanted to kind of get some insight as far as what is that
I
labor.
see one of the more dangerous positions is wife.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
noticed that too.
'Cause,
What?
it was the hospital would be, anyone
No, I know. Yeah, I
person
couldn't
didn't get
pass that
family.
up.
Yeah. So yeah, the and yeah, there's all the most dangerous things where, I mean, what people died of most frequently was typhoid fever and then pneumonia and then crushing injuries. And
Yeah.
so the other thing that I was kind of wondering from Jack was, how dangerous it felt like at the time. Um, and the most frequently those crushing injuries would be from coupling and decoupling, and whether that was still a dangerous activity, or if the technology had changed to the point that that wasn't as dangerous. So.
Well, as far as trainment is concerned, the automatic coupler, I think, got rid of a lot of when they had to guide the link and pin together, there were a lot of missing fingers and even hands, I think the brakeman's job the most dangerous. They had to sometimes go up top and ride the tops, and set the brakes by hand, and especially in snow or bad weather, that was dangerous. Climbing up and down cars. I would say their brakeman was a little more dangerous than engine service.
Yeah, in operating crews, there were two ranks. The brakeman conductor typically they weren't progressing up to become engineers. So it's fireman, engineer, brakeman, conductor were separate.
And they're separate crafts and separate unions too, aren't they?
Yeah.
In fact, the conductors had their own union, and the trainmen had BRT, and of course the engineers and firemen had separate unions, and some people double-headed. I mean, belonged to both. It was the
Because you
firemen.
were
A lot of
BLE, weren't
engineers
you,
stayed
Jack?
with the firemen's union even after they were promoted. As long as you belonged to a union, you were okay. I mean, there was no trouble. I think we were a union shop, so you had to belong to something. And I think it's kind of a tragedy that Americans abandon their unions. And now they're getting to the point where both people in a marriage got to work to make ends meet. And when I was young, that was one job, one person stayed home with the family and the other did the work, usually.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's kind of
So,
I really think
Jack,
that Gary and I've talked about it. We lived in a golden age. That period of post-World War II is kind of unique, actually, not just special. It was for ordinary people. It was a time of great opportunity and security if they chose to, embrace it.
And then Reagan was elected. Andrew.
Now Gary.
One of the I gotta show my credentials.
It doesn't bother me.
I gotta show my credentials.
I know.
Andrew, one of the things on that list I noticed was watchman, and typically the watchman was a switchman. Would actually have a little house next to a set of switches that needed to be thrown, because of course that was not automatic like they are today. And those were injured people who usually retained those jobs. They had been
switch tender.
Yeah,
gate.
Yeah, they had been injured in service and given that job as as a pension.
The positions seem like they kind of morphed over time. There was one thing that I'm referencing when I was looking up the different occupations was a book from like 1909 that was, here's the positions, and if they aren't doing their job, then here's how they can be, basically job performance reviews kind of a thing. And within that, they were saying, here's the different ones. And in some of those early ones, the watchman was just like a security guard. But then there was also like a police force that would oversee the security guard force. But then the switchman and watchman positions might have shifted over time or depended on companies. So
yeah. Just a couple points there. Railroads had and still have their own deputized police departments, with the full force of law behind them. as it pertains to their property. And Gary, aren't they authorized by Congress, I think?
You know, yes,
Yeah.
I believe that's true.
The other thing, Andrew, that's very unique about railroads, I alluded to it briefly. They don't have industrial insurance laws like we have here in the state of Washington. Everything that they do is all based on case law. And some of these cases can go back hundreds of years in terms of, was the employer culpable, or was this the employee's fault, or blah, blah, blah. And so this hospital system, it had to have been a reflection of how the railroads dealt with the industrial injuries that inevitably occurred in such a rough and tumble business. And, a lot of we were talking about this the other day, Gary, and you could probably help me here. The National Labor Relations Act came out of the National Railroad Act, didn't it?
Yes.
And Social Security came out of railroad retirement.
Well,
right?
Railroad retirement was before Social Security.
Yeah.
Railroad retirement collected almost twice as much money from each worker as Social Security does. And then they get a bigger payback at the end.
Because it's part Social Security and part pension.
Predated?
What's that, Jack?
Did they predate it, railroad retirement?
Yes, well, it happened. It was formalized together. They went.
The Great Northern had a pension plan for their employees. I'm not sure about the NP, but I know when they first got Social Security, Francis Perkins just used Bismarck's. It was a wonderful Ponzi scheme because you paid into it all your life. You could start drawing out at 65, which was the average lifespan. So half of the people wouldn't even be here.
Yeah.
And
right.
And if you did get an award, it was just enough money to keep you off the street. It wasn't enough for a lavish lifestyle. You better have something put away besides Social Security.
Right.
And they took the 6.8%. They take 6.8% out of Social Security. Railroad retirement was 13%. So we took out twice as much and we got twice as much back.
Yeah.
And there's been talk of trying to merge railroad retirement into Social Security. And I don't think that any of us will ever see that ever happen. So
well, it's tiered in it right now. They're kind of piggyback, but the thing is, like I say, it's if everybody collected off it, it wouldn't work. Some people pay into it all their lives, they never collect a dime.
That's the way insurance works.
That's right.
It's actually insuring the state, ensuring the civility and the peace and quiet of the state itself. It's that they take money away from people. And they knew that human nature being what it is, a lot of people wouldn't put anything away. So when you got to that age, they give you enough just to keep you out of sight, just the bare bones, but it would keep the state a little quieter. And people were lucky enough and smart enough to save a little on the side. It was even better, but it wasn't designed as a giveaway. It was designed to protect the peace and quiet of the country. And pretty clever. Well, it was Otto von Bismarck that thought it up, and he was not exactly a choir boy,
Well, you now have been past 65, 32 years, haven't you?
Yeah, well,
so you're one of the winners on that Social Security thing, Jack, right?
Big winner.
Everybody wanted me to retire, and I was, what the hell? I'm starting to just get the hang of it now. Why should I quit?
You also said
there's some people on the railroad thought I never did get the hang of it. So, well, the Great Northern people, I came back from Livingston. I gave up the official job because the guys I was supervising were making 50% more money than I was because they were unionized. And being an officer, I was not unionized. So, and I did raise my pay roughly 50%, even though at the time I came back, I couldn't hold very much. Of course, the merger was 2 years old. There was a certain amount of friction between the railroads. There's chauvinism, you know. Our railroad's best and yours is wooden axle. But all in all, the Great Northern people really made me welcome and helped me. One old conductor said, "Oh, you slammed us around quite a bit the first," that when nobody said anything. They did. They were very, they helped me learn the railroad and always go. And I thought the Great Northern guys had a little more gung ho than ours did. Maybe that was just an impression. All in all, it was a lot of fun, though. It had to be because there was really no point in working past 70 financially. I was just doing it for the fun of it. But
Just
then
'cause you
you
like to drive
rationalize
trains.
that you go to these railroad theme parks, you gotta pay $50 to run an engine for 15 minutes. And they paid us. You know, how can you beat that?
Now, Jack, before I let you go, didn't you run a train out at the Northwest Railroad Museum in Snoqualmie recently?
No, I got to run that little switch engine. Was it
Little steam engine.
924? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
924.
I
So you
did
could-
move it around a little bit.
yeah, there you go.
But
So,
under supervision.
well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, folks, you know, we're a little after quarter after the hour, so let's just cycle back for any last questions. Ailey, anything more you want to squeeze in, or Andrew? You know, now's your chance.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I appreciate being on the call and sharing everything you have with us, Jack. Thank you.
Yeah, well, like Eric Hoffer says, a lot of the things I talked about doing, maybe I didn't do them, but I thought I did.
Yeah, same here. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Jack.
Yeah.
Great.
And we did record the call, so if you want a copy of it, let me know and I'll figure out how to Dropbox it to you.
Yeah, I hope
And then Andrew, drop me a note, or I'll try to remember and look and see what images we have at PNRA of the NP hospital. Go ahead.
I
Gary.
would say, quite frankly, that he's got as good or better
Than
quality.
what we've got.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, save me a lot of investigative work then.
Well, yeah, I appreciate all your help anyway. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, if you
So
can get anything off that article from the Tacoma News Review magazine, if you, I don't know if there's anything to help you there, but it's something to look at anyway.
I think I do have that article already, and I've been using it. So yeah.
okay.
Good.
All right. Well, going once, going twice. So I'm going to just say thank you all for being here. Thanks as always to our special guest, Jack, and his agent Gary. You know,
Agent.
because it's a team effort with these guys. And you know, it's just a great opportunity for Jack to reminisce and share some stories. You learn a little bit about him. Alia, you learn a little bit about, you know, what we try to do in terms of trying to capture oral histories at PNRA. So
Definitely.
appreciate both of you being here. And like I say, going once, going twice. And I'm going to say we're adjourned, and all thank you very much for being here today. So
Alrighty. Thanks
okay,
so much,
bye
Jonathan.
for now. Okay,
Take care.
bye-bye. Bye, Jack. You were awesome. See you later.